Welcome to this week's Cattle Call. I'm Susan Littlefield here on the Rural Radio Network. Once again, an interesting type of week. And I'm broadcasting on location today. So let's take a look at what's been happening in these markets, because obviously the way these grain prices have been trading have made for some nervous cattle producers. And Brad Kooima joins us. He's with Kooima and Varlick out of Sioux Center, Iowa. And Brad, I don't think I have not talked to a cattle producer yet that isn't talking about the nervousness as they watch what happens globally and what it's doing to their grain prices.
Well, you're right. Neither have I. And Susan, it's like, I don't know how many times I've heard of a commentary that they go like, you got to be kidding me. First a fire, then COVID, then we finally got this thing going, right? And we're making a little money feeding these cattle, and feels like we're getting into tighter numbers. And now we got to worry about World War III. And I don't mean to make light of it. Certainly, this is a very troubling and worrisome situation going on there. So, yes, and as we've talked about before, cattle seem to always, react negatively to uncertainty, right? So that's what we've been dealing with here a little bit. But I think there's a practical thing that's happening here in the front end of the market as well, Susan, and that is as the cost of gain has been escalating here the last while. Clearly, the wheat story is the top of the story on this, inability to ship wheat out of Ukraine, but that's a feed grain. So that makes the corn go right with it. And that's rallied the corn obviously sharply here. So, we're looking at corn at $7.50 or $60 in the bunk here. And I'd imagine in Texas and Kansas, it's 75 cents to $1 more than that. So We've got people willing to sell some cattle, probably more willing so than they would have been otherwise. They want move them to the other side of the equation. So now that's a little negative right up front because people are selling cattle easier, but that isn't necessarily really bearish either, because now you're pulling some cattle forward, I guess, so I think that's where we're at right now. A little bit of relief in the corn price might change the market pretty quickly.
So it's been extremely dry. And as I talked to producers and folks from Oklahoma, Kansas, they said there's not a lot of cattle out grazing those wheat stalks because there's just nothing there.
No, you're right. Almost none. In fact, you really have to look hard, and maybe some irrigation stuff and stuff like that. So yeah, that's a good point, because you're coming off that cattle and feed report that we had between the last time you and I visited, which was largely neutral. But people have talked about, wow, that's a lot of cattle on feed, right? I mean, it's like almost the biggest in history, or it is. And some of the explanation for that is because we've placed a lot of cattle earlier than we would have otherwise, so they are on feed, right? That's how they get counted. So instead of going to that wheat pasture first and getting grown up a little bit, they've gone right into a feed yard. I think. We saw that in the north. I placed yearlings in July and August. The cattle typically I would have gotten August and September because they ran out of grass. That's also moved all those cattle forward as they get fat. So, if I had a look at the what you were asking about or commenting about the wheat pasture thing, I think you've maybe moved some cattle out of later third quarter into, I don't know. To me, those cattle would typically been more like September, October cattle that we've maybe moved into July and August now. And we really don't need to add any more numbers to the August slot already. That's always a troublesome time, right? Demand's poor, and you got a lot of calves on feed. If I had to pick a soft spot in the market supply wise, it's definitely in that August slot.
All right, I want to ask you about the month of April. We're into March now, but is April more the month we need to be thinking about when it comes to purchasing and playing the market? I don't want to use the word playing the markets, but you know what I mean.
Well, yeah, I think I do. If you look at any seasonal book, right, you'll see that, typically you should sell your summer cattle sometime around, my middle daughter's birthday is today. That's an easy way for me to remember. The early part of March is typically a seasonal time where one looks to lay off some hedges in the summer. Okay. So that's the seasonal. Now, we haven't had a seasonal that's worked very good at all for about 3 years because of all the distortion of the black swan events that we've had. I think what's unique about this year's March and April is that what I hinted at a little bit is that typically we're still selling yearlings here in the north, and we won't be. I think we've pulled that whole crop ahead 45 days. Now, granted, these calves will have done better too, because the reason is performance, because we haven't had winter hardly, but you still, it's going to be hard to get a calf fat in April. And as soon as that weather starts to warm up, and as soon as you get within a little bit of reach of Mother's Day, for instance, all those beef features start to gear up. And I think one thing that we have proven the last couple of years, that the demand, especially domestic demand, as well as global, but particularly domestic demand, is excellent. So I think as we move into that time frame, I'm going to call for a contra-seasonal rally going into April is what I think. Now, if again, this situation with Russia, Ukraine, if that escalates into something worse, I've got to be able to change my mind. But I would like to think that maybe we can get this thing moved on down the road here in a week or two and figure out some resolution. Clearly the world is speaking loudly against what's going on. Let's hope we can get to some kind of resolution, get back to a normal market.
All right, sounds good. Thanks for joining us this week, Brad.
Sure.
Brad Kooima has been joining us for this week's Cattle Call. Just a reminder, folks, commodity futures and options involve a substantial risk of loss, not suitable to all investors. And that's the Cattle Call right here on the Rural Radio Network.